The Writers Guild of America strike has entered its third week. They are seeking better pay and other improved conditions from the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers.
The Writers Guild of America is one of the United States' most powerful unions, and the recent strike is evidence of this. The Guild states that even as series budgets have increased, the share of writers has consistently decreased. The writers have attempted to negotiate with the Alliance of Motion Pictures and Television Producers, but they consistently delayed it until the writers eventually striked. This strike is evident of the power that unions have, but in an era where 50% of Americans only own 2.5% of its wealth, why don't we see strikes in unions as often? The answer lies in the corporate tactic of union busting. The history of unions is a very long one. Since the Industrial Revolution and the adoption of Adam Smith's ideas in The Wealth of Nations, capitalist business owners have done whatever it takes to make a profit. When America industrialized, factory workers began seeing their rights stripped away more and more often as they were considered unskilled and easily replaceable. Early unions like the Knights of Labor and the AFL began fighting for things like a national minimum wage and shorter workdays. Very quickly, the public sector accepted such policies, however the private sector remained nearly impenetrable. With more and more immigrants, worker abuse became more frequent and also affected racial tensions, as groups were pitted against each other by their employers. In the era of FDR, unions saw some victories with the Fair Labor Standards Act, which mandated a minimum wage, extra pay for overtime, and basic child labor laws, and the founding of the National Labor Relations Board. In 1979, union membership peaked, but then we saw a shift.
I take no obligation more seriously.
President Reagan, leadership that's working.
In the Reagan era, fiscal conservatism and big business thrived, and Republicans became very anti-union, while Democrats became very pro-union. The Red Scare also played a role in union membership decreasing, as many union leaders were socialists, communists, or anarchists, who were distrusted by Americans.
It is for this reason that I must tell those who fail to report for duty this morning they are in violation of the law, and if they do not report for work within 48 hours, they have forfeited their jobs and will be terminated.
Reagan showed businesses what they could do by attacking the public sector, firing 11,000 striking air traffic control workers. This showed private employers what they could do to prevent unions in striking. Companies began using union-busting techniques long forgotten in order to prevent unions from forming in their workplace. There was also a shift in the labor market where jobs changed from mostly manufacturing to offices and retail, as well as tech jobs, where unions hadn't really been established. This change in the market made it even harder for unions to break into, which has persisted to the present day. 2022 had the lowest rate of union membership despite the frequent efforts by employees to organize, despite us having a Democratic president proclaiming himself to be pro-union. Today, lack of union support and lack of union power exist because of union-busting techniques by employers. Companies have multiple techniques that they have been using to prevent unions. Companies are advised by anti-union lawyers and advisors to follow a practice called union avoidance. One of the keys to union avoidance is to prolong agreement. Studies found that after workers won union elections, 52% of the time they were without a first contract a year later, 37% 2 years later. By dragging out negotiations, companies make workers disheartened and sometimes convince them to decertify their unions. Companies like Amazon, Starbucks, and Chipotle have also fired workers for discussing unions and even closed whole branches. All of this is illegal under the NLRA. However, not only do all these companies claim that they did not do these things, there is also an incentive for them to do this, as there is no monetary repercussions for these companies. They simply have to apologize and promise they will never union bust again, and rehire or pay any workers that they fired after subtracting any earnings they may have received while fired. Our labor laws are simply just not strong enough. These are companies which proclaim to be progressive, and yet they resort to these union busting tactics simply to prevent their workers from having a fair pay. Companies claim that forced unionization can be destructive and can force employers to lose money. However, we've seen how a lack of unions has led to constant worker abuse and wage stagnation throughout the years. Some states are planning on relieving child labor laws as there are worker shortages due to COVID-19 and other recent issues. And rather than allow immigrants into these countries, these counties would rather have children doing labor. Now you might be asking yourself, if our labor laws are too weak, is the government able to solve this issue? And yes, it is. While we do not yet have legislation to protect unions, it has been proposed. The Protecting the Right to Organize Act was proposed to Congress and passed by the House in March of 2021. It was stopped by a filibuster in the Senate by unanimous Republican opposition. Now you might be asking yourselves, why should I care about this issue? This issue is very important to us, especially since North Carolina and South Carolina are the two states with the lowest union membership. If nothing changes within the next few years, those of us who remain in the state and enter the workforce will be entering it in a state with little regard for union rights. The right to organize is protected by the NLRA, and it should not be infringed as frequently as it is. These companies are using Gilded Age tactics in order to prevent their workers from having fair wages, and that is just inhumane. The best way to act on this issue is to email, call, contact any of the North Carolina state representatives or just any representatives at the House or Senate and get them to support the PRO Act. I've listed a couple on the screen. If you want to organize your workplace now or in the future, then you can follow the instructions on the NLRB website and file a petition with around 30% of your workers to the Winston-Salem office. The right to organize is a human right, and it's sad that in America this right is so frequently infringed.